back, Rebels.
Hello. Let's talk about risk. Oh, you've really thrown me off there. Risk. Yeah, we've talked about risk before, haven't we? About how scary it is to take a risk, but every good thing that's happened in my life has probably come after I've taken a risk.
Yeah, definitely. And I think wherever there's risk, there's quite often reward. Probably more often than not. That's a nice little soundbite for you. But yeah, I think specifically risk with people thinking about a creative career, because I think a lot of people would love to go and do something creative, but it's too risky.
Yeah. Okay. So I see where you're going with that. We talk a lot in this week's episode about the creative industries. And I mean, the fact is the creative industries are the fastest growing export for the UK. So it's bringing in a shit ton of money into the UK economy. And I know you are listening all around the world. I don't think it's a UK specific thing. I think the creative industries are growing across the planet.
I think with the kind of emergence of the internet, with the emergence of things like social media, content is now becoming more and more important. There's so many more ways to consume it. There's so many more places to consume it, which means there's more content that's needed. So generally creativity is what causes that content. So there's just this cycle at the moment of it's just building and building and building where more and more content is needed all the time.
And so why it might seem like a risk is because it's not the standard thing that's been done in the past. You're perhaps advised by people that are older than you that this is not a good career path because it deviates from the standard that we always grew up with, which is get a job, get a gold watch, graduate.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to being patient and not playing the short-term game, because if you think, okay, short-term, going to do something creative to make money from it, that's a risk. It's going to be hard to make money from it tomorrow or next week or in the first year. It's going to be a building process. But if you develop creative skills, they can be used across your life. Like whether you're at university, whether you're in a job currently, by starting learning other creative skills that you don't currently have and adapting your skill set, you're way more employable if you want to go and get a job somewhere else, or you're developing the skills to go and start something on your own, which when you start a business, you wear all the hats, like literally all the hats. So the more things you can do for yourself, the easier that is. Because at the start, when you start anything, there's not really much money there. So if you think, I want a website, but this person down the street's charging me $1,000 for a website, but I don't have a spare $1,000. If you taught yourself how to do that, then you'd have a free website.
So it can seem really scary. We totally understand. It can seem like you're doing the crazy thing. And the reason this show is called Creative Rebels is because we know that a lot of you kind of feel that you're the black sheep, that you're the odd one out, that you're the creative one, the kooky one. And have confidence in that and realize that that is actually your biggest strength. And being creative is firstly, if you're listening to this, that's what fulfills you. That's what you love doing. Like creativity is what drives you forward. So try and find ways where you can be practicing creativity at all times. So if you love writing, then write all the time. So if you want to be a writer, you have to earn enough money to keep a roof over your head, because if you don't have a roof over your head, you can't carry on writing. As we talk about in this episode, Anna was writing for herself, like for a newsletter that she was putting out. That gave her an excuse to be writing, because she knew she wasn't always going to be working on commissions, because in the beginning there weren't any commissions coming in. And so I think it's whatever it is that does set you on fire, find a way to be doing that as much as possible, even if it's not for a client. Firstly, for your sanity and your mental health, because we know that staying creative is what's going to fulfill you. But secondly, because of the opportunities that will come from you just making the work. It seems like a risk. It seems like you're really going out on a limb. Like I want to make donuts. Like if we look at previous guests like Vicky, like I want to make donuts that in these mad shapes and letters and all of these sort of different designs, like full on creativity. But it's worked out, and people might have told her that she was crazy for wanting to do donuts. If you want to dance, if you want to do poetry, whatever it is, the way the world is heading, you've got just as much chance of making a success of that as you have of going and being a cog in a system within a big organization that feels safe now. But the way the world is changing, there's no guarantee that is going to be safe.
I think if you're talented, it isn't risky. You should just absolutely go for it. I think it's, if you haven't learned that skill yet, is when the risk sets in, and that's the time that make it as safe for yourself as possible. By learning, you'll get talented, and when you're talented, there is no risk.
Yes, and you guys keep sending us your wins, and we love it. And you're going from strength to strength, and like, we just believe in you. We believe in our listeners. We believe in the power of creativity. So just keep doing what you're doing. You've got this 100%. So let's get into the episode. But before we do,
We've got a few events coming up.
yeah, we do. On the 10th of November, 2019, if you are in London, there's an event where I'm going to be part of the panel. If you go to @kettleboobs, I'm not even going to explain what that is. You're going to have to go to their Instagram to find out, @kettleboobs, and you will be able to see about their boobs and balance event.
The second event we've got is on the 13th of November. That's with Alex Manzi at General Assembly, again in London.
And go to @IamAlexManzi.
Find out more.
Anna Codrea-Rado is a freelance journalist, and she's written for The Guardian, the BBC, Vice, and countless other publications. Anna writes a weekly newsletter, which is called The Professional Freelancer, and she's also founder of FJ&CO, which is basically where freelance writers can go, and it's filled with like tools and resources and everything that you need if you are trying to embark on a career as a writer. We talk quite a lot about money in this episode, and one of the things that Anna's quite well known for is her Fair Pay for Freelancers campaign, which we dive into in the show, but it essentially is what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's really changing the industry.
Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff that is basically just not right, and it's not just across journalism, it's across all the creative industries. So we talk about, getting paid, knowing your worth, and all of that sort of stuff. Hi, Anna.
Hi,
Welcome to the show.
thank you for having me.
How did your newsletter start?
It started not necessarily by accident. So I got made redundant in 2017, and I didn't, and it was quite a dramatic sort of, I went in on a Friday and they said, don't come back. So by the Monday, decided I was going to give freelancing a try, and I didn't have any commissions yet, obviously, because I just started out. So I decided to start writing a newsletter. I already was quite a big newsletter reader and really liked Dolly Alderton used to write this really amazing newsletter, which she doesn't do anymore. And there was Lenny Letter, which also doesn't exist anymore. And so I was quite a big newsletter reader. So I thought, I'll just give newsletters a try. And I did it really with the idea of, I didn't know what was going to happen. And I didn't want to not have somewhere to write every week, because I didn't know what was going to happen with the commissions and whether I was going to get commissioned, how the freelancing was going to pan out. So I thought, if I have a slot in my diary to send out this newsletter every week, I know that I've got a space to write. And when it first started, it had a different name to what it does now. It covered very different things. I didn't really have a plan. I just started writing random thoughts. And it kind of all went from there. And a lot of things changed along the way, but it started basically from a point of a real low career moment where I had no job.
Had the thought of going freelance been bubbling along in the back of your head, or was it literally a snap decision in the moment of the redundancy?
It was bubbling in the back of my mind. Right. I actually recently found a little notebook that I had bought in the year before I went freelance, and I'd titled it Anna's Freelancing Plan. And, how I was going to go freelance. But I was just always too scared to take the leap. I am such a planner and such a control freak, and I had all of these plans in place. I probably could have just gone and done it, but I was just too scared. So it was it was a snap decision in the sense that I made the decision really quickly, literally over that weekend, that I'm just going to do this now. And not look for another job and just go into freelancing. But it was all there in fact, not even in the back of my mind, at the very forefront of my mind, that I really wanted to be doing.
So it's another one then. We literally need to get a chart on the wall where we literally do those like the prison dots and then the dashes and then the line through it, because we've had so many guests who have been like, I've been thinking about going freelance, been thinking about like leaving my job, and then they got made redundant, and that was the leap that they took.
Yeah, and it always takes that catalyst to get someone to do something that they actually want to do. So we've got a new thing of like
Make your own redundancy package.
Make your own redundancy
Amazing.
package. So you save up enough so you can have the next 6 months. So you can actually then go and do the thing that you would have done if someone else made you redundant tomorrow.
The real irony in what happened to me is in the end, I did get some redundancy money, but I thought I wasn't going to get any for various reasons I won't necessarily go into. But I had planned that I would build this cushion because everything you read, every blog you read about how to go freelance, it says build a financial cushion. And I kind of was doing it, but I definitely didn't have it in the place that I thought it needed to be in. And when I went, and a lot of people also decide to go freelance because they do have that redundancy cushion.
Yeah.
When I eventually got mine, first of all, it takes ages to get your redundancy money. When I eventually got mine, it was nowhere near as generous as I could, like other people's have been, and what it could be to kind of make that leap. So yeah, there was this irony in the fact that I didn't even have that financial cushion anyway.
How much of a cushion, like how many months did you have kind of saved up?
I actually can't remember. Probably like a couple of months.
Yeah, so not a long time.
Not
at
a long
all.
time. And also, like I said, you think, oh, you were going to get this redundancy package, but in the end, it takes like a good 2 months to actually see that money anyway. So
what I love then is that you knew you weren't instantly going to be booking hundreds of jobs. So in order to kind of, I guess, keep yourself active, the newsletter was just to give you something to write.
it was to give you something to write, and it was also, looking back on it, it was to regain control over something as well. So if I look back on the things that really that made me feel that I didn't want to be working in a traditional job environment, a lot of it has to do with feeling like I didn't have ownership over projects and feeling like I didn't have control over my career, over my work, all of these kinds of things. And even at that point, right, almost pre-freelancing, I already realized that, yeah, freelancing is great, but like, especially if you're a freelance journalist, you're still having to ask permission to do something. You don't just publish stuff on someone else's website without them giving you a green light first. Whereas the newsletter was entirely my project. And I think a lot of it was also to do with that control, that ownership, that project that is entirely mine. But also from a really practical point of view, like I said, just that place to write every week, which also was in response to what had been happening throughout my career, where I'd been an editor up until that point, and I'd always really just wanted to be a writer and a reporter. And I kept applying for internal jobs for that, and I kept not getting them, and I kept thinking I'm not good enough to be a writer. So this was also everything I've been doing up until this point has been me basically trying to kind of prove like them, whoever them is, wrong, that I am actually good enough to write, and I can do all of this stuff.
That's a big driver for me, is proving people wrong, even if you don't know who they are.
They don't know that you're trying to prove them wrong.
Yeah. I guess it's probably just internal, isn't it? It's probably just with yourself. The newsletter has kind of developed into it's an arm of your business now.
Yeah. So at some point, I really focused it just on freelancing, and what became really apparent, I even actually asked my sort of very early readers, who the majority of whom were friends and family and former colleagues, what it was about.
Because you're starting from zero, so you just go through your address book and add people.
Yeah, so the very first email I sent it to probably about between 50 and 100 people I actually knew, and I said, I'm starting a newsletter, but please, you have to opt into it. And I kind of gave them the link to sign up to MailChimp. I didn't just add people to a list, and I think a good 30 of them signed up from the beginning. And I kind of bumbled my way through, and then at some point I kind of felt like I don't really know what I'm doing with this newsletter, and I actually asked people for feedback, and it was a small enough list and people who knew me well enough to actually give really valuable feedback. And the thing that came back, the resounding thing that came back, was everything you've been writing about your experience as a freelancer is really, really fascinating, really interesting. And that's when I started focusing the newsletter exclusively on freelancing and basically chronicling my journey as a freelancer, with the hope that it would help other people and basically be the resource that I didn't have when I was at the beginning of my journey, and also when I was thinking about going freelance and all of that kind of stuff. And that and the minute I kind of, pretty much from the sort of the week that I refocused it, the growth for the newsletter just started to really take off, and it just became a place where it's clear now that the majority of people who are reading it are not my friends. I don't know I don't know my readers anymore. I mean, I kind of know them, but I don't know them personally.
In what way have you grown it?
So it started getting shout outs from other newsletters, and most of it's basically been organic. So it's been getting shout outs from other newsletters, other sort of members of the freelance community recommend it. It gets forwarded to people. I kind of hear from fellow journalists who go and speak at universities or whatever. They sort of recommend it as a resource. It just gets recommended mainly through word of mouth, be that digital word of mouth or actual word of mouth. And then also a really interesting thing happened is I switched from MailChimp to Substack, which is it's a newsletter platform, but it's been specifically designed for people who want to send editorial style emails rather than using an email as a marketing tool. MailChimp is really a marketing platform, like it's a marketing tool. And when I switched over to Substack, it's a lot more shareable. The newsletter actually also exists basically almost in a blog. It has a proper URL and it's a lot more shareable. Unlike when you use MailChimp, it's actually really hard to access your archive and it's quite hard to share the link. Whereas Substack is super shareable, and people also pretty much every Friday. So I send it out every Friday, and people just tweet it out. So I've noticed like a real pickup in the readership since I switched over to Substack, because basically that is a platform that is designed for people who want to write a newsletter that exists as a piece of content in and of itself, where the aim is to read the newsletter and stay in your inbox and read the newsletter, rather than a marketing tool which it's kind of trying to get you to go and do something else. I want people to stay and read. I don't want them to go anywhere from my newsletter. Does
it allow someone, like, say 6 months down the line, to find that piece of content?
Yeah, it's a lot easier, and it's got essentially it's kind of like a blog and a newsletter almost, and it has a much easier, it has a searchable archive, a much cleaner archive, whereas MailChimp's archive, it kind of auto deletes or starts dropping off from the bottom, which is fair enough. I mean, if you think about the majority of people who are using MailChimp, it's businesses and brands. I'm not going to go into
here's a current offer. You don't need to
go back into the archive. So.
And also, I don't know how Substack works, but with MailChimp, once you reach a certain point, it's going to start charging you for you to send out your own free newsletter to people.
So that is actually how I ended up, A, why I moved to Substack, and B, why I turned the newsletter into part of my business, because I hit that point. And also the fees for MailChimp start ramping up really quickly.
Yeah, they do.
So I was already spending, and as the newsletter grew, and it really is my favorite thing to do. It's the thing I love writing the most. And so as it grew, and I started feeling the pressure of this audience of people who aren't just my friends, I actually started taking it a lot more seriously. I mean, I've always taken it seriously, but even more seriously. So I wanted to dedicate more time to it. And I spend so much of my time talking about how to make a sustainable self-employed business. Well, it's really not very sustainable to spend a good day and a half doing something and it then costing you money on top of it. Yeah. So I did a lot of soul searching and kind of thinking, what am I going to do? What are the different options? You can do sponsored newsletters, which I did do. It is an option. You can do ads. There's all these things you can do. What Substack offers, it sounds like I'm sponsored by Substack. I'm not. You can offer a paid version of your newsletter, which is what I do. So people who pay, they get additional newsletters from me. They also get, I also run events and they get access to some of those events for free as well. So it then basically becomes a membership model where people who pay, they just get more stuff, basically. And it's just a really good way for you to turn a writing project into something sustainable and into something that generates like a revenue stream for you.
What percentage of people go for the paid subscription?
So I think I'm now about 5%. It's hard to it's a constant moving target because the free one grows. But yeah, I think I'm about 4 or 5%, which I'm really happy with because the golden goose is to get to 10%. So you're looking at a 10% conversion. So if that I'm more than happy with. You know, you definitely think the misconception is like, oh wow, you know, I've got like 5,000 subscribers. They're not all going to go paid. They're really not, and that's absolutely fine. I do. It's that thing where the people who do pay make the whole thing work, basically. And interestingly, it's also really, I think, has improved the quality of the free version as well, because it just means that now I know that this is a part of, I have the resources to put back into this, and I can just do more with the whole thing. And it's not just, you know, I'm a freelancer who writes a newsletter about freelancing. It's all very meta, but there are plenty of other authors and writers on Substack and kind of, or using other platforms or whatever it might be, who are writing newsletters about all sorts of things. There's one about the climate crisis, or how to get there's one sort of about the kind of like the publishing world, and there's one about sort of the ins and outs of like the Chinese economy. And there's so many things that you can write about and sort of do a paid newsletter on.
And that takes about a day and a half, a week to do.
Probably, yeah, and kind of when it's all said and done. I think it's it gets quite blurry because I also have the events as well that I do. So I'm probably spending I'm not very good at, I don't just say Monday I do journalism and Tuesday I do my newsletter and stuff like that or whatever. I blur it all in, so it's quite hard for me to quantify. But I'm probably spending kind of, if I think about the events as well, I'm probably spending a good more like 2 to 3 days on all of that kind of stuff. But the actual writing of the newsletter takes the best part of a day. How
did the events come about?
People reading the newsletter just wanted more, basically. I've heard you guys talk about something similar with the podcast, where you keep hearing the same questions, and how can you answer the same question but with the maximum impact of the answer. And for me, one of those ways was doing events. So the events I do are super practical, and my goal with them is that everyone who comes should be able to leave knowing at least one thing that's going to make their freelance life easier or more lucrative or something. They really need to leave with an actual thing they can action. So they're pretty much always how-to panels. So, you know, how to pitch to editors, how to get a book deal, how to manage your finances as a freelancer, all of these types of things. So yeah, it kind of came off the back of just seeing trends in the types of questions I get back with the newsletter, because people reply to me and they ask questions, and it was these same things coming up, and it was also a large part was also to do with trying to just build out the community, because that is the one downside of newsletters, is they do feel a bit one way. And especially because the space that I work in, sort of the freelance space, it can be really lonely. Most freelance journalists are working from their kitchen table at home, desperately missing the buzz of the newsroom and missing being around other people. You know, journalists are quite sociable people who like to be around others and kind of get that kind of energy. I'm actually not one of those types of journalists. I do really like being at home working on my own, but still, it was also partly just to have that community, and also just to connect offline as well, because there's a different kind of connection you get when you're actually meeting in person to when
100%. We love live events, don't we?
The Q&A part at the end is just amazing, because you can actually because everyone has the same problems, but everyone's problems are slightly different because it's specific to them. So we can say, talk to someone on the show and be like, they do this for a job and they've got this problem and this is the answer. But it doesn't really fit for me, or it could fit for them, but they just don't take it in the same way. But as soon as you're there, okay, well, you can do this, 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 and this, and you can just brainstorm ideas on the spot when you're with them. But obviously, when you're listening to us, there's no back and forth.
Not a two-way conversation. Yeah. I love it when you see something click and they're like, oh yeah, I never thought of that, and you're just like, yes, it's the best.
It's also just really nice being around other people as well, and having that human interaction, especially when you spend days working by yourself. So
I always think of it like playing The Sims, where everyone's got their little bars for everything, and you've got one of them's a social bar, and when it gets to the bottom, the people are just help me. And I think everyone needs that level of socialness. Even if you work on your own every day, there needs to be that kind of way to come together. And I'm quite a fan of, if you work freelance and you're on your own and you like being around with people, like get a little community of like 3 or 4, like get a small office together, or like if your kitchen table's big enough, put 4 of you around it, because it's so nice to have people that you can bounce ideas off. And if you are just on your own, I feel like sometimes you can get a bit stuck.
Yeah, I mean, there are various kind of WhatsApp groups, and like I now have a Slack group where, you know, people kind of arrange co-working days where they'll just meet up at the British Library, and it'll just be a bunch of freelancers. Not even they're not working on a project together. They're just working next to each other.
Yeah, it's like we did it at uni. It was like I say we. I didn't go many times, but my friends would always get together and go to the library to study, and like everyone did completely different courses. But it was like just nice to have people around. And a few times that I did go, like my course was more like on the computer and hands-on. I did it at home, but like it was really, really fun when I went. And because you can just like, I'm bored of this, let's just have a chat for a bit and like throw M&Ms at each other or something stupid.
I mean, I don't think that's happening with freelancers in WeWork, but hopefully not.
There's free beer in WeWork, so.
So you first popped onto my radar with your fair pay for freelancers. I'm sure that, I mean, probably did great things for you. You probably popped onto a lot of radars with that. What kind of started that for you?
So I have this campaign called Fair Pay for Freelancers, and it's all around trying to get the media to pay its freelancers better and fairer and on time. It was something that I realised very quickly into freelancing, that payment and late payment was a massive issue. And now there is this particular quirk within the media industry and journalism where it's not so much that invoices are not being paid on time, it's that you can't actually invoice until the piece you've written has been published. So it's this
months.
Yeah, so there's this thing called payment on publication, which does what it says on the tin. They will pay you when the piece is published. If you're writing for magazines, or if you're writing kind of a bigger investigation or something, or just, you know, there is the news cycle, stuff gets pushed. Journalism is just an inherently very kind of disorganized beast. It will be, because it's news, it's very reactive. But the way that impacts freelancers is you can get commissioned for something, and this happens to me all the time. You get commissioned for something, and the piece just the publication date just keeps getting pushed back, and it will be months until you see any of your fee. So it's not so much that you're invoicing and then not getting the money on time.
Because if you're writing a piece on Brexit, then that's going to go out straight away. But if you're writing something on how to bogle in the Bahamas, then I've watched too much Spaced. Daisy Steiner is but anyway, she's my benchmark for a journalist. But yeah, like I guess evergreen content, then that will get pushed back.
The evergreen content is really where and it's this real catch-22, because if you're a freelancer, you need to be writing pieces that are actually going to get you noticed, and they actually tend to be ones that are not really that tied to the news cycle. They tend to be those kind of more sort of hard to put your finger on kind of cultural conversation points that, yes, they are obviously newsy, but there's not an actual news event tied to it. And those are the pieces that can take a long time to write, and also can get pushed back. Or also investigations, they take months to produce. And I have learned the hard way that if you do an investigation, you need to be asking for something up front. Sometimes there are, if you become senior enough, or you have a good enough relationship with an editor, there's always something you can do to find a loophole to work around it. But the standard practice is that you get paid on publication. So I'd already realised very early on that this was a thing, and this was kind of going to be really hard to navigate. And then I did have a couple of kind of late pay overdue invoices, and it took so much effort and kind of it just takes so much energy to chase payments. I always knew that going into freelancing there'd be lots of admin, and I'm fine with that. I actually kind of weirdly enjoy it, but it's the amount of I know the amount of time that I'm spending chasing money that is actually owed to me for something that I've actually done and is out there on the internet, and the company is really benefiting from that. I just was quite shocked by. But anyway, then at the beginning of this year, the Pool, which was a women's website, closed. And even though I'd never written for them, I've got some friends who had worked for them. I'd never written for them, and was not affected by this personally.
Our friend was the editor.
Yeah,
I was listening to that episode. It was a really great episode. So yeah, for background on what happened to the Pool, listen to that episode. But in a nutshell, it closed, and lots of freelancers were left out of pocket. And that to me was the straw that broke the camel's back. And it also was the point where I kind of had this moment where I was like, oh, when you're a freelancer and you have an overdue invoice, you are a creditor to a large company. And if, in the worst case scenario, as what happened to the pool, they go out of business, you won't get your money back. And that puts freelancers in an unnecessarily vulnerable position. And so I started the campaign. I spoke to a bunch of freelancers and I put together this open letter, and in it asks for 3 things from the media bosses: an end to payment on publication, a respect of late payment fees, because freelancers are actually entitled to a late payment fee, but companies just ignore this, and
that's a legal
requirement. That's not me making something up. That's me asking companies to obey the law that they're supposed to obey.
I feel like there's definitely the fear in that as well, as like, if I give you a late payment fee, you just won't employ me again.
So I slap on late payment fees all the time now, because actually I feel that I was really worried about launching this campaign that, no one would employ me and all this. Actually, what's happened is, from a personal point of view, editors are aware of this, and I actually often get people kind of will say, we'll make sure to pay you on time.
Yeah,
and
you're the late payment girl. We can't pay you late.
Which is kind of, that's not good, because I don't want some kind of personal loophole. This needs to change for across the industry.
But by slapping on those fees, you are helping make change.
But what happens is, I've never actually been paid a fee. All that happens is it just speeds up the process of which I get the fee. But for any freelancers listening, if you do have an overdue invoice, I highly encourage any freelancers to contact the office of the Small Business Commissioner. His office deals with this issue. They do help freelancers. It's confusing because it says small business, but freelancers are very much included. The service is free. They have a 100% success rate, and they've claimed back something like over £5 million in unpaid invoices. They are very sensitive to not burning bridges, so they're not going to go in really hard and kind of ruin your professional relationship. They want you to get your money back and then continue to have a professional relationship. In many cases, by the time you kind of take it to kind of a third party, you don't want to work for these people anymore. Yeah. But still, get the money back that is
It's nice to outsource it as well, because it takes you don't have to go in really angry and be the one that's shouting at them saying you owe me money. It's like that's handed off to someone else.
I feel like what you could do is if you had almost like a bit of a union where everyone puts on their invoice, I'm a part of this group, and then anyone who receives that's going to be like, they're going to get your kind of the same kind of level of what you get. So if everyone kind of had this stamp on the bottom of their invoice, they'd be like, fuck, pay this person.
Yeah, I think there's a world where that is actually probably going to happen, or it's not far off, or something. The reality is there are now so many freelancers. It is a growing industry. It's over 15% of the total UK workforce, and that number is on the rise. And also, unlike, I really kind of speak obviously for journalists, but there used to be this kind of idea that I'm not going to talk to other freelancers because that's the competition. Yeah. We're now in a place where, because I think a lot of us came to freelancing because of redundancy, freelancers are really collaborative with each other, and there is more of a collegiate atmosphere, and there's more of a friendliness, and there's more of we're all in this together, and some kind of collective action is already happening, through this campaign, through other campaigns, through various freelancer unions that are trying to form. So yeah, I'm hoping that there is a world in which that, there is some kind of power in the numbers of freelancers.
I mean, we noticed when we were wet behind the ears and first started our business that we were being led by these big companies who were telling us, they were dictating to us, these are the terms that you must obey to. And then it wasn't until someone sort of just gave us a bit of advice and said, once you've painted their wall, they can't get a refund. You can't unpaint it. It's been done. You should be charging them before you go in there. That we sort of said, oh yeah. And I think we're very quick to accept the norm, and what we're told, this is the structure, you must obey it. But then, now we go in and we go, no, well, it's payment before, and
we won't start painting.
And they come back and they go, oh, I'm really sorry, but our payment terms are 90 days. And we go, okay, well then you won't get any artists on Monday.
And they always find a way. There's always a way that they can get a credit card to pay you separately. There's always a way.
I think it really comes down to the power dynamic though, because you're dealing direct with your clients, whereas there is kind of a barrier, and it's usually when I'm dealing with a large publishing house, it's me against a large company. Yeah. And so I had this experience where I went to get my nails done, actually still on, by a freelance nail artist, and she asked me for a deposit. And of course I paid it, because it's a no-brainer to me that, I'm going to pay her a deposit, because if I don't show up, that's an hour of her time that I've wasted. Of course I need to pay her a deposit. I can't go to an editor and say, pay me a deposit for my article, because that power dynamic is just completely in their favor. Whereas in your case, you actually hold the power.
Well, we realized that we were kind of inventing an industry at the time, because we were doing something that wasn't really being done at the time. So we had that sort of power on our side. But I mean, we find it the same way, that obviously, because you've been on it, you're like really fair with how you pay other people, and it's been the same with us. So whenever we deal with other small businesses, we've painted loads of stuff for small businesses, and they pay straight away. And then as soon as you're working for like some of the biggest brands in the world, they give you this 90-day bullshit, and you're just like, wow. I mean, because a small business, like, cash flow is so tremendously hard.
It's what's putting cash flow is. I think it's pretty much the number one reason that most small businesses go out of business, and it is affected by the large companies. And to be quite honest, I just sometimes some of the companies and the way they deal with freelancers, you think, is this actually is this how you actually manage your cash flow, by just trying to delay payment as much as possible? You kind of can't help but think that some of this is actually quite malicious.
It's insane, isn't it?
I think for like some of the biggest companies who have 90 days, that's because they've got billions or trillions in the bank, and like 60 days of interest on top of that is a shit ton of money. So it's like, it's for them to do that, they make an absolute fortune off it, whereas we suffer.
But it does, exactly. And if you think about the inverse, it really adds up. If you're a really savvy freelancer who's kind of putting your money for tax into not that there are that many high interest savings accounts out at the moment, but if you are really savvy and you're doing all of this kind of good savings, if you think about all the money that is getting tied up in overdue invoices, you are losing out quite a lot of money every year.
And the time it takes to chase those down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a considerable amount of time. As soon as we started earning enough money to pay ourselves an actual monthly salary, we did it, because it's very stressful not knowing how much is coming in every month. But that's kind of the life of the freelancer. What kind of tips and stuff have you got for managing your money, I guess, especially when you might be waiting to get paid for a long time from a client?
I think the most important thing is, if you don't already have one, you need to start building an emergency fund. I think that's true of anyone, any stage of life. It's particularly important for women to have one. But I think that has to be your absolute priority. And an emergency fund is having £1,000 in a account that you can access fairly easily, and you don't need to be worrying too much about interest or whatever on it. That is money for kind of when the shit hits the fan.
Which it does.
And having that there weirdly makes the shit hit the fan less. The emergencies feel like less of an emergency when you can actually deal with them. There are lots of ways you can actually build up to have that spare grand lying around. Like there are all these apps out there which will round up your spending.
Yeah.
Like, lots of the mobile banking apps do it. There are specialist apps that do it. Even if you put £3, even if you set up a standing order to put £3 into a bank account, by the end of the year you would have that £1,000. So I think that's a really good place to start, because most freelancer worry comes down to money. In fact, I think all of the freelancer worry comes down to it in some form or another. Some of it is real worry and some of it is imagined worry. So you want to be in a position where you can actually deal with financial hiccups as they come down the road, but also not be worrying about the stuff that isn't actually something that you need to concern yourself with. And I think a lot of the sort of imagined worry comes from avoiding looking in your bank account and avoiding doing all of the really boring financial stuff, because it is boring. You do have to kind of set up another, even if you're not a limited company, even if you're a sole trader, you should have a separate bank account. Even if it doesn't have to be a proper business account, but You need to separate your finances. You need to find a good invoicing system. All of this stuff is boring, but at least it removes the part of the worry that is just you just being too scared to look in your bank account. So yeah, I mean, I can talk about money stuff for like till the cows come home, but I think those are like the really big things. Is have a way to actually pay for things if things do go wrong, and just like it's kind of like exercise. Like there's no point trying to do exercise that you don't enjoy. Find some way to tolerate doing your money stuff.
I think a really good way to save, and like I read it in a book probably about 6 months ago and I've been doing it ever since, is a kind of a thing called like pay yourself first. So as soon as your wage comes in or whatever piece of money comes in, take like a percentage of that. I think the book said 16%. Put that in like some kind of savings account, and then because people live to their means, so if you've then got the rest of it to pay, so pay that before you've even got your rent, like pay that first, and then pay your rent, and then you've got your chunk left over. And it's like if you haven't got enough to pay your rent, you'll find a way to pay your rent, like you always do. But if you leave a saving to the end of the month, there's not going to be anything left because you'll just rinse it.
It's really funny you talk about the pay yourself first method, because I was writing the members post for today's newsletter, and it is a big financial, I'm writing this 4-part financial guide to dealing with your freelancer finances, and I was writing about that method in it today, because it's typically used for sort of personal finance, but I think it's a really good way for freelancers to deal with their tax money.
Yes.
So when you're thinking in that paying yourself first, you should also be pay yourself first and the tax man, and put that money for your tax aside straight away, because you will spend it otherwise. And it's not your money, it's money you need to pay back. And it is, especially when you first go freelance and you learn about this payment on account business, where you basically, the first year you go freelance, you basically will have your largest tax bill because you're kind of paying in advance. And you will get a really big shock when you have to pay that tax bill. And so finding some way to save for tax, which is, again, it's one of the most unappealing things you have to save for. Because at least when you're saving for a house or for a holiday or for whatever it might be, it's fun. This is not fun saving. But,
saving for someone else.
Yeah.
There's another good thing I heard as well. It was kind of like I don't do it, but it's like a 33, 33, 33 or 34. And you put like a third into your tax. This is more on a business side of things. So your third into your tax, a third into growing your business, and then the other third is for you. And I think that's quite a nice way to do it for a business side of things, because at least you're not with your third, you live within that third. You make sure your rent and your life can involve in there. You don't go and spend a ridiculous amount on a flat that you can't actually afford because it doesn't fit into that.
I think there are so many great budgeting techniques out there and so many great kind of personal finance methods, and I think it's so much about finding the one that really fits you. But I think the step that you need to do before that is figure out the role that money plays in your life. And I have this theory that everyone has a money shame. They have something about money that just like they feel kind of gets them really emotional. It's like a shame, basically, something they feel really shameful about. And you need to like get really real with that and kind of uncover that and get very comfortable about.
Could you give us an example of what a money shame might be?
So like your parents like helping you financially, or your partner helping you financially, or you growing up with loads of money or without loads of money. Something about like how the role money has played in your life, probably right back to your childhood, and how that has informed your relationship with money. And I think so much of people's issues like come from that, something along those lines or something like that. You can do this kind of, it sounds really cheesy, but you can like write your sort of money story where you go back to sort of your first memory of like what money was. Like it might be like your parents gave you my mum gave me this like, I don't know how we got it, but it was this like this furry blue Barclays piggy bank thing, and I think the idea was to like get kids to like save or something, and he also had a pound. I can't really remember, but like I have this memory of this like furry blue money like piggy bank thing, and so from an early age I was always taught about saving and stuff like that, and you kind of basically you write your money story and sort of all of the points that you remember money being in your life, and kind of like what the feelings were around that and sort of what impact that has, and just getting really real about how you view money. Because money means lots of different things to lots of different people, and I think like that's something that you should really work on first, and then from there everything actually kind of becomes a little bit easier, because there are so many ways that you can be really good with money, and actually the nuts and bolts of it is actually not that hard, but it's so emotional. And figuring out like why is it emotional for you in particular, I think that's really important.
Because we're never taught about money. We only learn it from whoever we grow up with, who also wasn't taught about it. And so I suppose that's where we develop these problems, I guess.
Yeah, and like personal finance is you get sent off, you go to uni and everyone got the NatWest student account because it gave you the biggest overdraft, and you get in the overdraft in your freshers week and you start your life in debt, basically.
Yeah, and then people live the rest of their 20s still paying that off, and credit card debt and store cards. And
it was years after leaving uni, so I got out of my overdraft. Like years.
Yeah, and like I was never taught this stuff at school. I'm just so blessed that I have a mum who is so kind of like really taught me so much financial stuff, and is so savvy and kind of like very and also like really drilled into me the importance of being a sort of financially independent as a woman as well. But like without that, like why would I have learned this stuff?
It's really interesting as well. I care very little about money, and so Adam's been investing recently, and he's recommended this book to me on investing. I haven't bothered reading it, and I know I should be doing it for my future, but I just can't be bothered. Like there's the hassle involved in learning about investing. I'd rather just not have the money than learn about investing.
So there is, I have this whole theory about, because there's this kind of new wave of investing now where there are all these apps make it easier and all this stuff, which I think is really, really good, because there is this massive barrier to investing, and it keeps people out basically, and investing is really good for your financial freedom and like your financial future. And I kind of think that actually if you learn about investing, if you kind of get into investing, you're kind of almost doing a bit of a like, you're sticking the middle finger up to people who want to keep you out of that world.
Yeah.
It's like, this is really particularly true for women. Women kind of are, the language around money and women is women need to save by not shopping. Men need to save by investing.
Yeah. My girlfriend went to a talk recently all around kind of female investment, because it is a very male thing. Like, I don't know any women who invest, because women save in a bank account, whereas men will invest. And then it's a really weird one, because obviously then like years down the line, the men will have so much more money. It's like a really weird society.
And then that feeds into the whole power loop.
Yeah. I wonder if was the event VestPod.
It was an Angel. I think Emma Gannon might have been one of the people hosting it.
There's a great community called VestPod, and it's all about financial empowerment for women.
It's sponsored by NatWest, I know that.
Oh, okay, yeah. NatWest have been doing loads of stuff for around this issue as well. So yeah, it's really it's a feminist issue, that kind of getting women to be financially
because women
free.
will spend a lot more on products, won't they? So like razors, that like a Mach 3 is exactly the same as a Venus, but a Venus has got like 10 quid more on it.
Yeah.
Which is a problem.
Yeah, no, women are getting screwed left, right and centre basically. So it's actually really great that there's been a recent shift in the money conversation, and actually going around saying you're a woman who likes money is now something really empowering. And I think it's brilliant, because the reality is money gives you options, and women need options. So
I think it's the start of Marie Forleo book that we've just read. Like she was saying, like, never let your finances rely with a man, because it's like as soon as you get divorced or something and you haven't built anything for yourself, you're just left, and it's like, now what do I do? I'm 40 and have nothing. It's awful.
Yeah, I mean there was this brilliant viral article which essentially talked about the need for an emergency fund, but it called it a fuck off fund, and it was specifically written about women who may find themselves in an abusive relationship or just in some kind of toxic relationship that they need to get out of, and they need that you need to have the money So you could literally walk out of the door with just a backpack, and you could afford to go and stay in a hotel, or you will be fine if you left a relationship. So yeah, that's a whole other thing. But
what then are some of the revenue streams that freelancers might be neglecting? Because I think what you're really good at is you've got multiple different streams. And what are the things that some people should maybe look at if they're a freelancer?
the ones that are really obvious and that don't require you to actually retrain. So if I think about journalists or writers or basically anyone in the communicating space, that is public speaking and talking at events, not necessarily running your own events, but chairing other people's events, because corporate events can be super lucrative and often doesn't actually require you to do anything that you don't already know how to do. Sure, talking in front of people might be really daunting, but actually there are plenty of people out there who are actually really comfortable with it. And there's a whole world of getting on the event circuit that can be really, really lucrative.
Yeah. And if you're not confident, then listen to our episode with Viv Grosskop, because she will tell you how to own the room.
But yeah, I think that's a really key one. I mean, I think also any like self-made revenue streams. So like what I did with the newsletter, there are ways that you can monetize your projects. I have this friend and pretty much mentor called Harriet Minter, who's a fellow journalist. She always says that someone out there has money. Someone has the money that you need to do the project that you want to do. It's just about figuring it out, finding them. Yeah, also like brand partnerships and kind of sponsored content. It sounds like a really dirty word, but the reality is brands have money and they want to work with creatives, and there is very much a way to do it that doesn't involve you selling your soul. Like I really don't believe that if you do any commercial work, you're a sellout.
Yeah, no, we've built a business on doing brand partnerships.
Yeah. I mean, my landlord doesn't accept my kind of purism as in lieu of rent. So there are definitely ways to exist within our kind of capitalist structure, and
we need to get over the shame of charging for our work. Like, it's valid to charge for, if you're creating something, get paid for it.
Yeah, exactly. There are ways for you to uphold your ethics, your morals, your values, whilst also getting a paycheck. Like that's definitely possible. I think that kind of also really ties into all of this stuff around revenue streams as well. It's just accepting that you're not going to be a sellout, because that also then helps you kind of think about revenue streams. I say the word revenue streams, people's eyes glaze over. All I was going to say is that I find this kind of the whole conversation around side hustles really kind of funny, because all side hustles are revenue streams, but it's just a sexier word. So yeah.
On your first point about if you like use the skills you have to do other jobs, I think a really kind of like practical way to do that would be if you wrote down all of your skills, gave it to someone else and say, what job could this person do? Because I think looking at it from someone else's point of view, you could be like, oh, well, if you do those, you could do this. You do those, you could do that. So I think that's everything that everyone should do, because I think that's great.
And you can also, another way, I did a very similar exercise with a group of young creatives at the Roundhouse recently, where I got them to write down their skills and ask themselves, how can I do this skill for someone else? How could I teach this skill? Or, how can I do this for someone else? How can I sell this skill? And that just gets you thinking about things in a different way. And that basically is, once you've answered that question, you have a revenue stream. Yeah.
It comes back to that thing of what we were talking about earlier, of just accepting what the norm is. So going, oh, I'm a journalist, so that means that I write articles, and just thinking a little bit deeper into, there's like a million other things that I could do. I could run a podcast, I could do events, etc., etc.
I think this is the same in jobs, not just being in the freelance world as well. Like if you want to move careers, think, well, what are my skills and how could that apply to something else? And then be able to like write a CV with these other things, saying like, well, these are all the skills I need for this job, and these are all the things I've done before. Just because it's not in this industry or anything similar, like you could do that there as well.
I think there's this idea also that if you have a job, that's it, that, that's your salary, you don't have to worry about anything else. But I think having multiple revenue streams is important for anyone, no matter what their job position is, whether they're freelance or whether they're in a staff role. Is it Warren? I mean, Warren Buffett talks about the importance of multiple streams of revenue, and he's doing pretty okay. Yeah. So you shouldn't just rely, and also particularly I often hear from people who kind of say, oh, I've got a mortgage, I've got a family, and all these commitments. Then the more commitments you have, the more secure you need to make yourself, and actually not relying just on one sole source of income from your job is probably quite smart, is, to kind of diversify that portfolio. Yeah.
So it means if something shit does happen, at least there's something to support you rather than going from 100 to 0.
Yeah, it's like us with multiple businesses. It's if one of our businesses tanks, then we can redivert that time into one of the other businesses. It's like we always say, if Graffiti Life fails, then we just would put all of our efforts into Parlour, our tattoo studio, and grow that. So yeah, it's the same thing, isn't it? But just on a bigger scale.
Yeah, because the reality is we do live in uncertain times, which is such a cliche, but it is true. There is no job for life. Job security is a myth. So relying just on one paycheck is really not smart.
I think as well, if you don't feel like you don't have skills to go and learn something else, learn something else. Like spend your time learning a craft that you don't currently have, because then at least that gives you the potential to do something.
Well, that's the thing that where people are saying about automation, and it's going to, on all these poor taxi drivers that are going to be out of a job when automation is, and I'm empathetic to that, but there is nothing to stop them from learning new skills. We all have the capacity to learn something new and change career at any point in our life.
My podcast co-host, Tiffany Philippou, has a really brilliant view about automation, where she really hopes that maybe the robots will just come and take our work away so we can just do less work.
Yeah, well, that's the goal, isn't it? Yeah. Is creativity will take over, because everything that is a boring, just a factory line job will just be done automated. I think she might be onto something.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we went to a talk about this recently together, and she said this question, and everyone kind of laughed, and we were kind of like, but no, that we should. Why do we want these robots to come and take away our jobs and then us have to do more work? No, we should just be having more leisure time. And why can't the goal be have more leisure time? I
think on the flips, my argument to that would be, the automation is going to come in by the companies, and that's going to save them money, so they're going to make more money. So it's not like everyone's going to just earn the same but only have to work half the amount of time. But I think what will be good for automation is, it's like when the Industrial Revolution happened, at that point, everyone was working in a farm, dragging things around, and it then allowed you to go, it's not like as soon as factories came, all the jobs went. People just found new things to do. Yep. So I think in our society going forward, when machines take over most of the jobs, people are going to have more time to do other things. So new kinds of jobs will be created that we don't even know now. And I think a lot more will go into creativity, and the way that kind of social media and the internet's going. People want content all the time, and I think there's going to be so many people who are just going to be content creators in the future. That's all they're going to be, because robots will do everything else, but they can't create content, whereas we can. So I think, learn to do something creative, because at least when that does happen, you've got a job in the future.
Yeah, the smartest career path you can take, creativity. Yeah. There you go. I read an article of yours about creativity hacks. Do you believe that creativity can be hacked?
The short answer is no, but read the article.
I think there's definitely a question in the title, so it's definitely a no.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. The question of the headline was, can creativity be hacked? And the short answer is no. And I say that as someone who, I love the Pomodoro technique, which for anyone who doesn't know, it's when you set a timer for 25 minutes and you work on a particular task for 25 minutes. You take a 5-minute break and you repeat that 4 times, then you can take a longer break. I also love calendar blocking. I have a bullet journal. I do all of the stuff, but I do that because I know what I'm trying to do. And it's not because I'm trying to chase productivity and creativity as this sort of elusive endpoint. It's me trying to make space to be creative and to be productive and to actually focus on the things that need to be focused on. There are lots of people out there who will buy a bullet journal because everyone else has got a bullet journal, and then be amazed that it's not producing some magical creative eureka moment. Or this amazing guy that I interviewed for the piece who said that he felt really, really under pressure in his job to be creative on demand. So he read somewhere that if you get increased blood flow to the brain, it will help you be creative. So he would lie off the side of his couch to try, like upside down, try and get more blood flow to the brain. But obviously all it did was give him a headache, and there were no creative ideas. And yeah, the thing I found really interesting is that, you know, as I was researching the piece, most of the wisdom around creativity and where a lot of the hacks come from, some professional talker has researched a famous person who did something really creative and sort of retroactively fitted a blueprint and a model, and then tries to sell that as a technique. And it will be like, Einstein wore thinking hats, or I don't know.
And went to sleep with a metal ball and a bowl, so when the metal ball dropped after 5 minutes, that would wake him up. Yeah, it's
just all this. But you then trying to replicate that isn't going to work for you. And I think it all comes back to sort of, you know, creativity. Really, all it is problem solving. Like it's problem solving, and it's given this status, and it's treated as a currency in our kind of capitalist world, when really it is just problem solving. And unless you have a problem to solve, there's no creativity
when you've
to be
got
had.
Too many problems to solve, that's when you need to get your bullet journal and start organising.
Exactly.
Yeah, by organising nothing, that's not going to make things happen.
Exactly. So yeah, just doing the hacks just for the sake of them, or just to, like I said, just to be creative for creativity's sake is just a recipe for disaster. And I think there is also a side point to all of this, which is, you know, why are we under so much pressure to be creative? Why are we trying to fit more?
The robots are coming.
Exactly, as the robots are coming. Why are we trying to fit more in? Because productivity is just doing more with less. So a really great way to be more productive is take stuff off your plate. But we don't do that. We just try to cram more things into less time. So, I mean, I'm also guilty of that. I do need to start saying no to more things. But no, I think creativity hacks are bullshit.
Amazing. So looking at events, you obviously had your newsletter, so you knew that at least some people were going to turn up to them. How should we start? Because, I mean, this is a bit of a selfish question, really, because we've been thinking about doing events. We've done a bunch, but under the security blanket of them being like Apple or Adobe or whatever, and it's like, we're a bit scared to like just go, oh, this is a Creative Rebels event. Like where would you start? And especially where would you start if you had no audience? Would you build the audience first before you put the event on?
You have to build the audience, because the point of an event is the audience there has to be value to the audience. There's a book called The Art of the Gathering, which picks apart good events and kind of how to host an event. It's a really good read, and it talks about how we've sort of lost our way and why are we even doing events. And it kind of talks about weddings and parties, and it's a really good example about, you know, you need to, with a wedding, you actually need to think about the guests. It's not the bride and groom show. It's for the guests to like enjoy and be part of your big celebration and your love and all of that stuff. But you go to lots of weddings where it's the bride and groom show, and you, the guest, like, it's not a comfortable experience for you. And it's this, you know, it's the same principle with any event. It starts with what is the value that's going to be brought to the participant. Like why would I come to the event? You know, what is it that I'm going to get out of it? And I think that's why I went down this very practical route of sort of offering really practical panels, because and also a very practical suggestion is you can ask your audience what they want. I did a survey at some point where I asked people what they wanted from events, and the big thing that came back was networking and like business skills. So I think lots of companies will put on events that they think sound really interesting or they're really interested in, but it needs to be about the audience and like, why would they come? What would they get out of it? What are the gaps in their knowledge that they're looking to fill? What's something that you can provide them where they'll leave and they'll really will have learned something that they can't get somewhere else? Also, I think it is really good to ask your audience, because you can often be surprised by like what they actually want and like their motivation for coming to events. But I think you do have to build some audience. It doesn't have to be a big one. Like you hear this advice of build an audience and you think, oh God, I'm going to have to make a mailing list of like 100,000 people. You really don't.
How many people came to your first event?
My very first event actually was one of my best events. 100 people turned up, and it was a panel on how to pitch to editors. It's because that is the bread and butter of any freelance journalists' business, that they need to know how to pitch to editors. So I think I sold about 100 tickets for that one. And I also did, and before that, I actually did an event with another journalist called Rosalind Warren, which was just a meetup for female freelance journalists. And we had about 70 people show up. And that was basically women who work in the media who just want to connect with other women who want to do what I kind of call horizontal networking rather than vertical networking. So where you're just meeting your peers rather than trying to go to trying to get something, trying to get a job, trying to get a commission.
That's really interesting.
So, but yeah, you guys should definitely do events, and it will be fine. And also, you can do them in a, so you can still do them in quite a controlled, sort of soft way, where if you find a venue and you don't have massive overheads, it's not going to be a disaster. I don't know, events, I still always have, every time I do an event, I always get that like pre-party nerves no one's going to come to my party. But they do, and it's fine, and they get loads out of it. So
I think that's the thing. We know that if we did an event, people would go away with a lot, because whenever we do talks and we're at other people's events, people leave with a lot. So I think it will be great.
Yeah, and a lot of our listeners have subscribed because they've found us at an event first. So yeah, we love these guys. We know they'll come. You'll come, won't you? Say you will. Your podcast is one of my favourite podcasts, as we've already discussed off mic. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and everyone should go and subscribe to Is This Working? Is This Working? You can say it a number of different ways. Title.
I think I'm the proudest of the title.
The title is great. Is This Working? And you launched it on the day that an article came out, and I've read that article. That because I mean, when that article came out, we were probably like a couple of months in, and it was that podcasts are at peak podcast. Yeah, we've reached peak podcast. How did you feel when you read that on launch day?
I must say it did. So Tiffany and I, my co-host, we did kind of have a bit of a panic where we were actually, no, I had a panic. Tiffany never panics. I was kind of like, oh God, the New York Times have written an article that says podcasts suck. No one's going to listen to our podcast. And then obviously that's not the case. I don't know, that article, I think it was really interesting, but I think it actually kind of conflated two issues because, well, first of all, there's this kind of truism in journalism where any headline that has a question in it, the answer is always no. This question of have we reached peak podcast, that's like saying have we reached peak radio, have we reached peak film, have we reached peak article? No, there's just a lot of content out there. You just have to be good. If your podcast is good, it will get listened to. If your podcast is not good, it won't. Like it's
so true.
Like
there are so many thousands and they're just really bad. And I'm a member of like a few podcast groups, and I see like everyone on there is like, how do I get more listeners? How do I get more listeners? It's like, be really good. Then people will share it with their friends. That's literally it.
Make content good enough that someone will tell someone else about.
I mean, so Tiffany's always saying this to me basically, where she'll say, you know, she's like, when we ever get feedback when someone says that your podcast is too long, what they're saying is your podcast is too boring. So her dad says our podcast is too long, and maybe he's not our core audience, but for him it's boring. And so we take that on, and it's, you know, there are all of these strategies for growth with podcasts, but the reality is it's like anything, any other piece of content, any book, any film, anything. If it's good, it will just rise to the top. Yes, there are some things you need to sort of be aware of, and algorithms and whatever, but fundamentally, if it is good, it will be fine. There was a piece in that New York Times article where it touched on this idea about, I can launch a podcast and then suddenly all the sponsorship money is going to roll in as though it's kind of like hundreds of thousands of pounds, and I'm going to sort of like float off on my with my wagon of riches.
They did the example of they were like following two millennials as they started their podcast, and their goal was and they gave up after 6 episodes, and because no one was listening, so they couldn't get any sponsors.
I think that is a lot more that I'm really interested in this side. And we talked about this in one of the episodes around success, kind of why do we think that we can just do something and instantly it's going to be some runaway success? It's not. The reason that, and even if you do have someone who seems to have come out of nowhere and been really successful, they haven't come out of nowhere. They have been working in obscurity for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And the reason their thing is good now is because they've done all of that work up until that point. So this kind of idea that I guess we just look on Instagram at people and think like, I could do that. I could be a podcaster. I could be an influencer. I could be a writer. I could be a whatever. And then you try it and it doesn't work. And then we somehow end up with these articles about being at peak podcast. It's kind of is a conflation of quite a lot of different things, I think. But I must say, it did put a bit of a dampener on the launch week to kind of the thing that everyone's talking about with podcasts is that there are too many of them.
One thing Tiffany always talks about, and we talk about it a lot, is start with why. So what's the why of your podcast?
To make work better.
And if you can nail it in that short a sentence, then it means you're onto a winner.
Luckily, I mean, I was in good practice because we were just having our meeting yesterday for season 2, and most of that meeting was spent in, with what is the why. And I think we already knew that. We knew what the why was before we started, but we just really wanted to actually kind of nail it down. But yeah, it's that is the most important thing I've learned on my freelance journey, and it is from Tiffany, and it is about your purpose and your why, and why are you doing things. And I think it's even more important for people who, I always knew I wanted to be a journalist, so I realised that when I was at university, but I never stopped to ask myself why I want to be a journalist and what it is about journalism that I am drawn to, and why, basically. And I think it's really important for everyone to figure that out, be it on an individual project or be it, with life. But I think that's just the best starting point for any creative project.
I think most people don't know what they want, like most people. And then when they figure out what they want, they don't know why they want it. And I think once you nail those two, then you can just attack life because you've got a game plan, because you know what you want and you know why you want it.
That's the secret to life, basically.
We have just nailed it.
Guys.
Amazing.
When does season 2 come out?
Mid-November. We haven't got a firm launch date, but it's going to be mid-November.
And why did you choose to do seasons? For your mental health?
Pretty much, yeah. We both have a lot on our plate, and I felt that doing it in seasons would give us natural breaks, basically. So that being said, the break we're taking is not very long, but it just gives us a way to kind of build in breaks rather than having to kind of announce that we're going off air and sort of and not be able to step away from the mics. I think also because, especially for season 2, we're going to come back, we're going to try and be a lot more, not newsy, but sort of try and tackle things that are really in the zeitgeist. So I think we wanted it to be a bit more self-contained, I suppose.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Where can people find you online?
I am at Anna Cod everywhere. Anna with 2 N's and then COD. And everything that you need to find about me is there. I'm also the only Anna Codrea-Rado in the whole world, so I've got great SEO. And the podcast is This Working? And we are on all of the places where podcasts exist.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.